Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to start actually by focusing on what I call the dark side of digital technology. And by dark side, I don't mean the cybersecurity, cybercrime, privacy kinds of issues. Those are certainly other dark sides. I'm going to talk about something that's intrinsic to digital technology. You cannot have digital technology without this dark side. And the dark side that I'm referring to is mounting performance pressure on all of us. As individuals and as institutions, the impact of this digital technology is to substantially, in a sustained way, increase pressure, performance pressure, on all of us. Now, I don't have time to go into the evidence behind that assertion. If you're interested, I run a research center called the Center for the Edge, and look up the Shift Index. It will give you a lot of data on the mounting performance pressure. What I want to focus on now is the psychological impact of that mounting performance pressure. Psychologists have a clear view of what happens to us. We have very natural human reactions to mounting pressure. The first reaction is to magnify our perception of risk and to discount our perception of reward. We can see all the potential, but there's so much risk, we just can't do it. And the result of that is we shorten our time horizons. Because there's so much risk, all we can do is focus on what we need to do today. Don't bother with the future. It's too uncertain, there's too much risk. Just focus on what you can do today. And the impact of that is we fall into what economists call the zero-sum view of the world. If all we can do is focus on today, there's a given set of resources that is already established. It's not going to change. The only question on the table is who's going to get those resources. Is it going to be you, or is it going to be me? It's win-lose. And in that kind of environment, there is a natural erosion of trust. You may seem like a really nice person, but at the end of the day, I know only one of us is going to get these resources. So what we have is a very natural human psychological reaction, but highly dysfunctional. We are evolving in dysfunctional ways around this mounting performance pressure. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Over time, as we fall into these perceptions, we magnify perception of risk, we shorten time horizons even further, it becomes more and more dysfunctional over time. So what can we do to address this situation? I believe in this context, narrative has a very powerful role. But what I want to do is make a differentiation between stories and narratives, because at least in my experience, most of us use stories and narratives as synonymous. They mean the same thing. I'm actually going to make a distinction that I think is important, and I hope that I persuade you that it is important. For me, stories have two fundamental attributes. The first attribute is a story is self-contained. There's a beginning, a middle, and a resolution to the story. Something happens to resolve it. And the second attribute is stories are about me, the storyteller, or they're about those people over there. They're not about you. You could use your imagination to figure out what you might do in the context of that story, but it's not about you. The contrast for me is narrative is open-ended. There's some kind of opportunity out on the horizon yet to be achieved, and it's not at all clear whether it will be achieved. And the resolution of the narrative hinges on you. It hinges on the choices you're going to make and the actions you're going to take. How will you resolve that narrative? At the end of the day, narratives are a powerful call to action. That's the essence of a narrative, at least the way I define it. And throughout history, we've had very powerful narratives that have shaped history. You can think of religious narratives. We were all born in sin. but a Savior was delivered to us and offers us the opportunity of salvation. But it's not guaranteed. It's up to you. It's up to the choices you're going to make, the actions you're going to take. What's it going to be? Very powerful. Think of the Marxist narrative. We were all born in chains. And we have the opportunity, if we come together, to throw off those chains and create a society from each according to his ability to each according to his need. A wonderful society, but it's not guaranteed. It requires struggle. We have to come together and struggle for that opportunity. What's it going to be? So I think when you talk about, and all of us, I think, see the power of stories, I would make the case that as powerful as stories are, narratives are even more powerful. Because throughout history, millions of people have given their lives for narratives. You want to talk about the power? The ultimate sacrifice. Narratives have driven us to that throughout history. So I think it's an interesting power that resides in narratives. Now, I don't want to in any way dismiss stories. I would actually make the case that stories can reinforce and amplify the power of a narrative. If I can tell some very specific stories about people who sought and got salvation, that reinforces the broader narrative. And if I have a broader narrative, that makes the stories even more powerful because they're not just isolated incidents, they're part of something much bigger, much more powerful. So I think the combination and interaction of stories and narratives is very powerful as well. Now, I'm going to resist the temptation to go into too much detail. I believe that narratives play out at many different levels. I believe each of us as individuals have a narrative that has driven our lives. And institutions can have narratives. And societies, social cities, regions, countries can have narratives. There are religious narratives, political narratives. But I want to focus for the rest of my time on institutional narratives, and specifically the opportunity for companies to develop narratives. Now, when I talk to executives and explain the difference between narrative and story, they say to me, "Oh, yes, we have a narrative. We began in very humble beginnings in a garage. We faced incredible obstacles. We overcame them, and it's open-ended. There's still a lot more to be achieved out there." My caution there is, at least the way I define it, that's not a narrative. What is the call to action? What are you asking all the rest of us to do? There is no call to action except maybe watch in awe or buy our products. I think it's remarkable to me that actually very few companies that I know of, and I certainly welcome ideas and suggestions from you, but very few companies that I know of have actually crafted truly engaging narratives. One example I'll give you, one of the few examples I know of, is actually Apple Computer. It was condensed down into a slogan, which was "Think Different." If you unpack that slogan, there's a pretty powerful narrative there. The narrative is that basically in the early days of digital technology, it put us in cubicles, it took away our names, gave us numbers, made us cogs in machines. And now for the first time, there's a new generation of technology that can allow us to express our unique individuality and our potential as individuals and human beings. But it's not automatic. It's not guaranteed. If you're going to do it, you got to think different. Are you willing to think different? Will you think different? I think it's the reason that Apple, for many, has become the equivalent of a religion. It is an extraordinarily powerful narrative that speaks to something very deep within many of us and is a call to action. Very few companies, again, from my experience, have that kind of narrative. Now, why do I emphasize this power of narrative? just to put it back into context of this world of mounting performance pressure, that dark side of technology, and those cognitive biases that are becoming more and more dysfunctional. The narrative provides us with an opportunity to shift those natural psychological reactions. Rather than increasing our perception of risk and discounting our perception of reward, narratives emphasize the opportunity, the reward, and discount the risk. Yes, there are going to be challenges along the way, but this is worth fighting for. And as a result, we tend to extend our time horizons. Now there's an opportunity out on the horizon that's worth really going after. And as we start to extend our time horizons, we go into what economists call a positive sum view of the world. That if we all come together and struggle for this opportunity, the opportunity is going to become much bigger over time. And so we're less concerned. Still, there's obviously issues about who gets allocation of the opportunity. But it's a much less intense issue than if I know there's a finite set of resources, and the only question is win-lose. And in that kind of environment, you start to build trust. People who come together around a narrative develop deep trust with each other. So I think there's a significant opportunity for companies as they start to harness the power of narrative to shift those natural psychological reactions and move many of us from passivity to action. And at the end of the day, basically creates the opportunity, first of all, for leverage in a world of mounting performance pressure where we have a limited set of resources. The more we can mobilize more people around our companies to accomplish things, we get significant leverage. Narratives are also very powerful environments for accelerating learning because we're all coming together to head for that opportunity, but the path is not clear. And we're going to experiment and improvise, and we're going to learn from each other as we pursue this opportunity. So learning accelerates. And loyalty. Around a narrative, you develop intense loyalty. And in a world of mounting performance pressure, where all of us have more choices and more opportunity to move from one company to another, that loyalty becomes extraordinarily valuable. So my belief is narratives are going to become a determinant of who creates value in this digital world and who destroys value. The companies that will create the value are those who are able to define a narrative that speaks to us in very powerful ways. I think at the end of the day, I would just ask you to ask 3 questions. One is, what is your personal narrative? Again, each of us have a personal narrative. Very few of us have taken the time to articulate it to ourselves. Second, what's the narrative of the institution you're affiliated with? And then third, what are the narratives of this broader society you're part of? The city, the region, the country? And how much alignment is there between that personal narrative, the institutional narrative, and the broader social narrative? And at the end of the day, reflect. Are these the kinds of narratives that will help me to create value and achieve more potential in a world of mounting performance pressure? Thank you very much.